Tēnā tātou katoa, kua whakarau I ka mai I raro I te maru o tēnei o ngā whare a tāhua. Tēnei ahau he uri o ngai tahu, ngai tuahuriri, I te taho tōku pāpā, I te taho tōku whaia, no ngā tiawa me te whānau apanui. Nā reira, tēnei ahau e mihi kau atu kia koutou, tai atu ki ngā manuhiri kua tai mai I tawhiti, I tā wāhi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi, kei te mihi. Kia koutou hoki, ngā pukenga, ngā akonga o te whare wānanga nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora everyone, it was such a grand introduction. I hope I live up to the expectations that have been proffered by Gail. So ngā mihi kia koutou. Really, I'm just a girl from Tuahiwi, 30 kilometres north of Christchurch, and today I hope to share with you, while the focus is on literacy, I really just want to share with you some of the aspects of our tribe our tribal journey, looking at examples from my own family, and also looking at regional development and our focus moving forward, which I'm sure will have a very strong literacy focus as well. So you've seen the little abstract there. I thought it was pertinent too to have that little piece of artistic work on the left, because that's really our first form of literacy. Our ancestors were graffiti artists. They settled in caves and drew on the cave walls with red ochre. And this is a modern day interpretation of one of our rock drawings from South Canterbury. And that was really the evidence of literacy in our family, being in our whānau, in my tribal whānau or family. And they date back obviously to the 1700s and earlier. We know that we've had Māori populations have settled here for at least 1,000 years, if not longer. But this is a modern day example of how our motifs and symbols, and in that story it's very colourful there, it's just red on grey in the actual cave. I've seen the cave where the drawing is, and that was talking about what was in the waterways and a drawing and recording that. And when other people came into the cave, they then added to their stories as well and told a story. And in fact, some of the storing is at the Koka Art Gallery. If anyone has time to go and visit that, there's an exhibition on of our Ngai Tahu artists. But moving forward, what we always do in Māoridom is we look to the past to place ourselves in the present and to look to the future. And a common description is that we walk into the future carrying the past with us on our shoulders and carrying our ancestors with us. So I'll do a little bit of a background on the tribe and then go back historically. There are 18 tribal councils that make up our tribe of Ngai Tahu, and they're all coastal settlements. 16 recognised now by the Crown on the east coast and 2 on the west coast. But there were lots of other non-permanent settlements. And Ngai Tahu as a tribe settled their treaty grievance with the Crown in 1998. The Act, in 1997, and then the Act in 1998. So it's 20 years since we've settled with the Crown. But it was 7 generations who fought the Ngai Tahu claim, and as early as 1 year after the signing of the land purchase agreement in 1848. But anyway, a lot of history there, so I won't go into. But what I want you to see up there is what impact being coastally settled would have on our language with the arrival of Europeans, compared to other parts of the North Island. And I'm from a family of both of my parents are Māori. My mother is from the north, Whakatane around the Bay of Plenty and up the east coast, and my father is from the south. And then they're really good representations when I show you a little bit of our family whakapapa of language loss and language revitalisation, and they're the extremes. 1 generation on my mother's side, 5 on my father's side. So when European settlers came, and most Ngai Tahu, like myself and probably like Gail and Sonia over here, we have an ancestor who was a sealer or a whaler. So early European settlement, our people were colonised just like that, one generation. And because we were coastally settled, the mountain range down the middle, and that impacted on the transmission of our language and culture. The other aspect of our tribal region, it's all the green. We do have contestation sometimes of our tribal boundaries, and while it's a V at the moment, it sometimes expands and it shrinks a little bit. But we are friends now with our other tribal, there are 8 tribal groups at the top of the south. So Te Runanga o Ngai Tahu, that great tribal corporate icon. So I'm from a little Runanga north of Canterbury and from Tuahiwi. So I'm from here, but I affiliate to other places, Moiraki, further south, Puketeraki, and also over the coast. But looking at language acquisition, when the Europeans came, there was intermarriage, and we quickly adopted English, but we were also literate in Māori as well. Now that only really happened in the 1800s through to the late 1800s. By the 1860s, Māori were outnumbered by Europeans, and we found ourselves really the minority people on our own landscape. And from that time on, really saw the demise of Te Reo Māori and intergenerational transmission for our families. Not to say our ancestors weren't quick to embrace English, they were, because it was the language of trade. But when the early missionaries came and the early settlers, they learnt Te Reo Māori. Until we were outnumbered, basically, and the land settlement purchases in the 1840s. So Canterbury, most of Canterbury was in one land purchase agreement in 1848, and there were 8 land purchase agreements altogether. Now, that's probably too much tribal history. I'm going to stick to the language. Today, flipping back, we do this all the time, move the past and the present. Today it says we have 57, but I look after the I look after the tribal register, and we have 58,500, and probably a few more have registered in the last couple of days. So we've grown at a dynamic speed from when we signed our treaty settlement in 1997, we're around 21,000. When we did a survey in 2000, we estimated from our own knowledge of our speakers that there was less than 1% fluent, and that was of the 21,000. So that's less than 200 people fluent in our language. And fluent in our dialect, we estimated there were probably 3 speakers. So the dialect was wiped out pretty quickly. It does still exist in manuscripts and through our younger generation who are learning our new dialect. We have a very young population. We have 44% under the age of 30. And so that's our tribal capacity. We need to aim all of our programs at our young people to build success as Ngai Tahu. So we have the phrase, Ngai Tahu enjoying success as Ngai Tahu. The Ministry of Education has a phrase, Māori enjoying success as Māori, because there are some things about our culture and heritage that are intrinsically Ngai Tahu. Our big, huge geographic region, our mahinga kai specific taonga species that you can't gather anywhere else but in our tribal area. The financial side I'm not going to talk about, but we're very successful as a tribe. So the next slide is really on my father's side. This is my tupuna, my ancestor's house in 1855. An artist sketched it. Already the influence of Pākehā settlement, the chimney there. But that was the last time on my father's family that we actually had a native speaker of Te Reo Māori. That was the last time we had a Te Aika person living in a Māori style whare. After that we moved into European settlement at Tuahiwi, or houses built, European built houses. And that seems so far away, the 1860s, why did we lose the language so quickly? I've actually got a photo of him, but I wasn't able to find it quickly. So when we had that dream and vision about 1,000 homes and 1,000 aspirations, we were thinking maybe in the year 2000, we thought maybe if we could get 10% of our people fluent then and transmitting the language in the home, then we would get past the extremely endangered stage. And that was the goal. But of course the tribe's gone forth and multiplied in big time, and now we're 58,500 tribal members. Oh my goodness. So we have actually improved, and I'm just going to tell you a bit about the story and how we got there. So you don't need to know the names, but this is my family up there, and that's Aprehama up the top. You don't need to be able to read the names at all. And my son did this for his university assignment, so I've just borrowed it. But yes, as you do. So this is me down here. These are my parents. My mother is a native speaker of Māori, but she came to live in the South Island at 18 years of age and never spoke Māori for at least 30 years. I didn't actually know my mum was a fluent speaker of Māori until I was about 13, and an auntie came to visit and mum started dusting the photograph, and I thought, why is she doing that? And then the auntie came to visit, who was actually an esteemed speaker of Māori, Amelia Simpson, and my mum's named after her mother. That's why she was dusting the photo. Anyway, it turns out that my mother, she started speaking to my mum in Māori, and we all looked at our mother, 6 children. We were shocked. We were shocked that she could speak so fluently. We knew she'd say a few odd phrases to us as children, but living in the South Island for 30 years, she had no one to talk Māori to. So we've got a lot of passive bilinguals who are now in their 60 to 90 year age group. The other feature I did want to talk about is when you have intergenerational transmission, it implies that it's usually the adults or the grandparents who are more fluent. That's probably not the case in our family now. After a lot of hard work, we've got currently alive 4 or 5, and I haven't gone into the whole family tree down, but I've got a niece, Moana here, who's fluent. She's got children. So we've got 3 generations of intergenerational transmission now that we didn't have for 5 generations. So when you're looking at language acquisition, literacy, and particularly the huge waves that people have to navigate when they're revitalising their language, this is the story for our people, that up to 5 generations of language loss in our tribe. Why is our tribe so different from my mum's? Because we were coastally settled, 1 generation, the language was gone. And we have this mantra now, it takes 1 generation to lose a language and 3 to get it back, because you want that transmission from more than 1 generation. So my family are a good example. My father still today, and the other important item to note probably before I get on to my dad is that on both sides, my grandparents all died before they were 65. All of them. Some 2 in their 50s, these 2 up here, Parikura and Ngāmani, died. So I never actually knew them. I went to the funeral of my grandfather, so I never got to get that intergenerational transmission because he lived up in Whakatane. None of either my grandfather, he died when I was 12. So we're living a lot longer now. So that's one, there's a good side effect, good effect of that is we can have, so currently in my family now we have 4 generations, 1, 2, 3, 4 of speakers. That's not the norm though. So I'm telling you, that's the best of a best case scenario. Angus and Sonia and Gail might have different stories. Angus is pretty fluent. Are all your mokopuna fluent, Angus? They are, because they're committed. So the passion and drive has to be a commitment to want to learn the language and preserve the language. Anyway, probably the last thing is my father is 82 and he's still alive and kicking, and he never learnt the language. never learnt the language. So when I started to raise my son, I learnt Māori as an adult. By the way, I haven't told my story. Māori was my fourth language. English, French, Latin. Tell you which school I went to, a Catholic school. And then Māori I started to learn here at Canterbury University. And I couldn't learn it in my first year because the Teachers College was actually in town and I'd have to come out here to learn it and etc. But I learned it in my second year at university. So that's why I'm the fifth generation example of language loss. And, you know, for me it's my identity and my makeup. But my dad never learnt to speak Māori, and at 82 he's got now 3 generations of speakers. He's really proud. When my son was young, he would communicate with my dad in Māori, and they'd use sign language, and they'd use, he'd try and teach him a bit of te reo, and Dad would just nod. But the factor I want to really raise is that when you've had such severe language loss, there's a little bit of intergenerational shame about that. My dad went to a boarding school in the North Island, and he ran away. It was Hatupolda, a Catholic Māori boarding school, and he was one of the founding pupils in 1950-something. And he was shamed because he was one of the few boys that couldn't speak Māori. And he said he felt shamed. He also had bad eyesight, so they put him out to milk the cows on the farm. And the way he survived was a priest, Father Wall, taught him boxing and taught him a bit of Māori while he was teaching him boxing. Anyway, but it is a serious factor because when you've got that intergenerational loss of the language, you actually have to reignite that passion in people. Because if you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 generations of language loss, there's a lot of whakamā or shame around that language loss. And we had to get over it. We actually had to get over it fast. Even when I taught in the North Island, people would say, oh, where are you from? And I'd go, oh, no te Waipounamu, no ngai Tahu. Oh, but where are you really from? Because they don't speak Māori down there. And I got that several times, and in fact, sometimes we still get that. Sometimes my children hear that, and of course they're very fluent. And the example I can give is one of my sons was going out with his friend, they were going out, a female friend, and they were out at an awards ceremony, and she's very fair, she is Māori. And so someone else started translating for her what they were saying in Māori, and she went like that because this person had assumed she couldn't speak Māori. And then at the end of the night, she turned to the girl that was translating for her and spoke in Māori and said, you shouldn't assume people's ability to speak the language or their ethnicity by their skin colour. And so that's another impact really of language loss and intermarriage, is that I've got nephews and nieces with blonde hair and blue eyes. So there's a lot of history in families, and any Indigenous tribal group in the world, you really need to look at the social impact of colonisation on that group if you're going to be working with them to restore. And researchers aren't really well liked by Indigenous communities. I wonder why. They're not liked because they tell our stories and they tell it in such a subtractive way that we look like we are useless people, and we're portrayed as people who've lost, yeah, and we have, and some of the loss of mana, but it's the way researchers, and they always look at the deficit side, not the additive positive side. So if you're going to do research, people, do something that's going to actually add value to te reo Māori, te ao Māori, if you're going to work with Māori people. And even if it's on English language acquisition, don't see their language, the first language of it's te reo Māori, as an issue, because actually that's about who they are. Anyway, look, I'll keep moving. In 2000 we wrote a strategy, you don't need to read this, but we got an expert, because he was visiting, Joshua Fishman, and we looked at his intergenerational disruption scale. We compared ourselves to the norm for Māori, and we decided on a language strategy called Ko tahi mano kaika, ko tahi mano wawata, and That was about the 1,000 homes and 1,000 aspirations. We just held a youth symposium recently and we called it Ko Tahi Mano Wawata, because we haven't quite got to the 1,000 homes. We've got several thousand people on our register, but if we could put our hand on our heart and say, have we got intergenerational transfer? We know we've got 400 homes. So we've only got 8 years to go by 2025 to get those other 600 homes. But I'm a good example because my children, one of them's in his own home. So our family's split into 2 homes. And if I count my mum, that's three homes. And she's in her home. But actually that's what the strategy was about, to see three or more generations. And we have a lot of activities that now need to obviously focus on young people. You saw the tribal makeup. Oh, here's Joshua. Oh, that's a younger Lynne. In 2000, when we brought him over in July, and he helped us. He was a language expert from the States and looked at Yiddish language revitalisation in New York, in a street in New York. He died a couple of years ago, but he passed on that legacy of us of focus on the home, focus on the home. What does all the language research for Māori focus on? The school, the school. So here's a big tip, focus on the home and the families, because you're not going to get that enhanced education success without looking at families and the whole situation. And he said do a few things simple and a few things well, and we wrote the fuller strategy. We've had the strategy in 2000 and we renew it every 5 years, so we've just renewed it, and I'm just going to show you a little bit about the strategy. So we look at language acquisition, whakamana te reo, status, corpus, and critical awareness and use. And one of the things I was talking about yesterday to the te reo team was we focused a lot on use, and that's good. And we focused a lot on running wānanga, but actually we've got a whole lot of material sitting in the Alexander Turnbull Library and the Hocken Library, and we actually need to be accessing our te reo resources which show good examples of our dialect from the past and reinvigorating our dialect, which we have been doing side by side, but I think we could accelerate that more so we're actually looking at digitising some of our manuscripts. In fact, this afternoon, that's where I'm going, Dunedin, to work with a group on a few of our manuscripts, and we're going to teach a group of 40 of our passionate language leaders some of the proverb metaphor that's used in those manuscripts that we can reinvigorate and use with our families and use in our wānanga. So we have different levels of te reo. So just a few of them, I'm not going to go into it all around language use. The focus is on the whānau. Kia kūrapa means get up to speed. So that's for people who've got no language, who come. In fact, we've got one over the West Coast, November 3 to 5, so next weekend. We've just had one in Kaikoura earlier in the year. We have full week immersion courses. We have some focusing on young people, rakatahi, and then we have these 1 day, 2 day wānanga, which is what I'm going to this afternoon, looking at our high level speakers and developing them. We've got everything on our website, all of our digital resources, but now we want to focus on parents transmitting the language, and I raised in the workshop the other day strategies which will help our parents enhance the learning experiences of their children. So I'll talk a bit about that later. This is a group of rangatahi who were at I can get the link up now, and Kura Reo Kai Tahu. So they're together, there were 65 attended this, they're outdoors, they're eating together in the whare, staying there, learning about the history of the language and the culture. And what they did was, I can get back to the original, what they did was they composed a haka. So a haka is all the emotions and all the energy and all the passion for the language, and they composed this haka at the end of it. Now these are children aged between, young people rather, they're not children, they're taiohi teenagers, ranging between the ages of 13 and 18, and we've got what we call the tuakana, the older siblings teaching the younger siblings. So unfortunately, whoever videoed this, I'm just taking it from Facebook, just did a very narrow strip. So let's see if we can play it now. Hopefully the sound works. Oh, it's slow, it's slowing down. Anyway, you get the gist, and here's what the post says in Māori. I won't read that, but a new haka composed by our te reo speakers urging all Rakatahi young people to continue the fight to restore te reo as a living language in our everyday lives. So not only do we teach them about the language, but we teach them about language revitalisation and their role in language revitalisation. And I guess the hope is when you bring young people together that they look at each other, oh, that person's a real speaker. And we could set up what we call a taumo tahu, a tahu dating service, but not at the wānanga, not there. I'll just see if it plays anymore. So it's the passion and the energy. Now these are boys that might not be successful in the classroom, but there they are giving it their all. So it's not to show off what the Rakatahi can do. Really what it's about is showing that we've got to create an energy. We've got to disrupt the poor educational success of our young people in schools. We've got to turn that around and create success. So the haka is about stand and with a bit of energy and anger we've got to fight for our language. It's up to us, the young people, to take hold of the language. So that's just one example of those wānanga. And we've run two. We ran during Te Wiki o Te Reo. Every week's a Māori language week for us, but there is 1 week set aside which has changed this year to September to suit the school terms. And we were able to do a couple of things, and we were able to get our children, young people, to see positive role models. So we had a symposium for young people. This is not the same one. This happened within 3 weeks of the other one further south. So we're getting a pool of proficient young people who are speakers. Anyway, I'll keep moving because I see the time. This research is one of the few pieces of research that has been taken in Te Waipounamu, the South Island, about Māori language transmission. And I was involved in it, but I had two young people helping me do the interviews with the families. And why I just wanted to show that is really that there's very little research about Te Reo Māori in the South Island, and that it was in 2015, so quite recent. It was part of a national study, so if you went to the website you'd find 8 other communities mentioned across New Zealand. It duplicates the type of work that was taken in the 1970s, a study by some of the things in that study. So we said who was likely to speak Te Reo Māori, whānau adults, and the children were more likely just to speak with their parents, siblings and grandparents. So that means the focus is still very much in families. And there's nothing new and exciting, unfortunately, in this research, because it tells us very much the same thing as what was the results in the 1970s. But what it did for me was that it actually talked about our families and I was really happy that half of the participants were Ngai Tahu and half were from other Māori tribal groups, but they're living in Christchurch. I'm not going to spend much time on it because you can go and read that on your own, and read some of the other communities and see what the contrast was, because some of the other communities have more speakers. And just a little bit about them assessing their language skills. So productive language skills, speaking, or other way around actually, receptor, or understanding, reading, so listening and reading, high, speaking and writing, not so high. Some did it very well, and the people that did it very well were actually the young people. So when I think about my mum, she never learnt to read in Māori, so there isn't a history of literacy in Māori for her. When I think about me, I learnt English first and then Māori fourth. I actually never learnt to read, because I'd already had the skills to read in English, I could pick it up more easily. Reading in Māori is a lot easier. There's only 10 consonant sounds, 5 vowel sounds, and they don't change like English does. So I'm a great promoter of teaching to read in Māori first, and then transfer those skills and learn the consonant blends, which are the tongue twisters for our young children. So that was pertinent to me when my niece was 13 and we were shopping at the supermarket, and she wrote down her little list. I said, oh, can you put margarine on the list? Can you put this on the list? And I said, show me what's on the list, and she wouldn't show it to me. She's a native speaker, grew up in the far north in a Māori speaking community in Matawai. And it was because she's a little bit shy about her English, margarine. And so I thought, oh, I'll fix that for her. So we sat down and we went through all the sounds that she found difficult. So it should be seen as enhancing their experience, not making them feel that they're not as well equipped as other young people. So literacy can be a tool of mass destruction, or it can be a tool that we use to help people become successful. We enable, we empower. Anyway, the study's there, so I won't spend too much more time about that. But the domains where they were speaking was still mainly the home, the marae and the school. And when we had a discussion, and Mary was at that afterwards at our presentation, we looked at the domains. Obviously it would be easy for me to speak Māori to a whole lot of people who could understand what I was speaking about. So I wouldn't speak Māori much at the university unless I was with a Māori speaker. I went to buy a bottle of water this morning, saw my friend Tahu, and we stood at the counter talking in Te Reo. But that's not it's not a strong language domain here at uni. No disrespect to the uni, because they have other interesting academic domain. But why couldn't it be? Why couldn't it be? And we have the attitudes of the wider population in New Zealand. So I'm telling a lot of little stories and anecdotes, but I remember when I worked here as a staff member, along before Gail's time, she came in after we were here, and I went to the library, and I heard a couple of guys speaking in Te Reo, so I went and talked to them and chatted. But the librarian made a complaint that she thought we were talking about her, and we weren't at all, because we were laughing and joking. And she made a complaint because one of the other people was a lecturer, and I was a lecturer or a senior manager at the time. And I thought this is the battle. Sometimes it's not our own people, it's the other, the majority. So when we can look at positive ways of promoting the language, and that in a way we need to be realistic, because in 2038, Māori children, Pacifica and Asian children will be the majority children in our country. And we need to wake up quickly that it's not just Māori, it's not just all the Pacifica languages, it's the Asian languages as well. I live in Wigram and 50% of the population are Asian. So all of my neighbours are Asian. So we really need to stop being monolingual and etc. But the key observation from all of that research was we need to, for me as a language teacher and person, we need to be encouraging the social use of the language. We need to have that spontaneous, informal language. And you don't really learn that in school. You don't really learn that at university. That's through creating language domains and where that spontaneous language can happen. Now, this is the family photo again, the two sons, both sides, both raised as first language speakers. It would be fair to say the son on the right is much stronger in Te Reo Māori. Even though I raised them exactly the same, the one on the left, he's here at uni, second year. Hopefully he's got exams next week, so he's at home studying, I hope. He's not as strong, same as I said, because he's probably in both, but I would say he's English dominant, even though he was raised as a first language speaker. Anyway, moving on, the next generation at the bottom is the mokopuna, the grandson, who's learnt Te Reo as his first language. And what I've noticed is, so I'm talking about some of the issues and challenges for us as Māori speakers, is that actually his language is a lot better than his father when he was his age. He's two and a half. And he's got far more proficient, even though it's still basic language, than his father. So I just wanted to share a couple of things. So this is my son, the oldest son. He's now 27. So this is when about 23 years ago, and I've just recorded him telling me a story. It's a reader in Te Reo, but the reader is a simple story. I want you to listen. Okay, I want to turn it off now. Okay.
It's very cute.
So the purpose of that was really to show that he was at 4 years then, so he wasn't a 2-year-old tohunga of the reo expert then, but that was just through basic looking at the pictures, talking to him, telling a story. He couldn't read obviously at that stage, but it was growing his language through storying, because culturally that is culturally inherent in Māori, is telling stories. And he's only looking at the pictures and doing that, but it was his favourite book at the time. Here's the 2-year-old mokopuna, and he's reading, he's just learning about reading now. So he's only just learning about reading. So the purpose of showing you those two generations, one was a bit older and one was a bit younger, is that we've proven that we can do it and teach literacy well, but it is the oral proficiency that needs to be built first. And many of the issues that we face is that if you've had intergenerational language loss, if you're working in a bilingual program in a school, or you've got a parent and you don't know how to speak Māori, but you want your kids to, you need to actually learn yourself. So we need to have programs that support the parents to develop their oral language fluency. The language and the culture can't be separated. In that story about Timoti, you wouldn't have understood it, but he's talking about Timoti going out to get pig hunting to get a pig, which is a traditional in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and people still do that now, go pig hunting, and in the Pacific Islands they do that too. But he mistakes the pig for a rabbit for the pig because the rabbit's got the feet, etc. Anyway, but it's got a Māori value in it, the value about gathering food, the value about having kai to kinaki, so kai kinaki to as part of a Māori, that Māori thinking of the world. It's the Māori view of the world that I like in that story. The second clip of my grandson was really him just learning to know about books. He's only 2.5 years old, for goodness sakes. It wasn't a particularly rich experience. He wasn't saying a lot, he was just answering and speaking, answering questions. And now and then there'd be the spontaneous language. But what I did do is sit down with my daughter-in-law and said to her, here's some strategies. These are the ways you can now advance his language by, one, asking questions, but also getting him to tell you a story about the picture. And he did start to do that, but unfortunately my phone ran out. Anyway, the other key thing is that there's including strong elements of oral narrative, movement of the body, and more overt expressions of emotion through songs, chants and haka. You saw that in the haka from those young people. That was where they could show all that energy in a positive way. It wasn't a negative way, because they were really showing their love for the language and demonstrating it, body and soul. The parents who are fluent speakers of te reo will need a lot of support to assist them and their children to learn te reo Māori. And we need to build that active listening and speaking. It is hard to compete with the television. Why compete? Should we have the digital stories available, etc.? Parents need to be modelled those strategies. I didn't have them as a young parent. I don't believe my mum had them as a young parent. And I believe that that's how we will accelerate language learning and literacy. And when children are ready to learn English, if it's their first language or second language rather, they've already got those transferable skills and it can be done quickly. My oldest son asked to learn English at 6 years old. I was really shocked because all the people say, no, immerse them in Māori for 3 years at least, and the research still says that, 3 to 5 years, and I'm thinking, but he really wanted to learn the story, to be able to read this particular story. So at the time I was at Waikato Uni and went and got some books out of the library and taught him to read. So kids, they're not all the same. So when they've got the passion for learning a language, just as he did for English, there was a certain time. So I just want to finish off to ensure intergenerational transmission of the language and culture and to show Ngāi Tahu enjoying success as Ngāi Tahu. We have our cultural strategy, which is part of our educational strategy, Manawa Whenua, Manawa Reo, Manawa Kaitahu, our world, our word, our way, and the tribal mantra for us in the generations to come. And every child, when they register with Ngāi Tahu, between when they're born and 6 months, so we have people actually registering prior to the children being born, they receive a tihate, a t-shirt with I'm Tahu, that's me. And then they have a little taonga, their pounamu, which links them to the land in Te Waiponamu. They have books, an alphabet freeze. So that, I guess that's why the tribal register, we encourage people to register. And so we contribute to their literacy from birth. So that was the Pepe pack with the woven harakeke taonga moi for them as well, safe sleeping, because their ear can go through. So we try to instill that with the parents at birth, and they have to register to get this. So it's free, they get it free, they just have to register on the tribal register. Now we're thinking of what are we going to do at 5 years? Are they going to have a little backpack with a digital device? Probably, because we're looking at doing that in July next year. But we have tried to disrupt, through our tribal initiatives, the deficit mode of being half empty and half full glass and the potential. And we now are looking at strategies of getting to the parents before they have the child. So if research is going to benefit us, we really need you to be looking at research for us, not just about us, but for us to enhance our lived experiences. Kia ora.